Martin Luther King Jr. one time was preaching on the subject of the Good Samaritan. And he said this. He said, on one hand, we're called to play the Good Samaritan on life's roadside, but that will only be an initial act. One day, we must come to see that the whole Jericho road must be transformed so that men and women will not be constantly beaten and robbed as they make their journey on life's highway. True compassion is more than flinging a coin to a beggar. It's not haphazard and superficial. It comes to see that the edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring. That was out of a message called A Time to Break the Silence. This quote, I heard it a couple years ago and it stuck with me ever since. When I first got here to the gospel mission, we started building a strategic plan. And we were talking about, where we want to go, how are we going to address the needs of people experiencing homelessness in our community. And as we were surveying our staff and our residents, our volunteers, all our partners, one of the themes that emerged from all of that stakeholder engagement was this need to address stigma around homelessness, about how to address NIMBYism, NIMBY, not in my backyard. And I was new to the field and I took notes and I heard this theme arising, but it wasn't until being in this work for several years before I understood why dealing with stigma and NIMBYism matters so much. It wasn't until after I got the hateful phone calls from people angry about our outreach team. It wasn't until I had people stalking our outreach team, filming them as they're feeding people on the streets. It wasn't until I read the op-ed pieces in the newspaper criticizing our work, criticizing people who are homeless and everyone who bothers to stop and help them. Then I started to understand why people who are in this work for so long become so passionate around stigma. And so, in alignment with our strategic plan, we made it one of our core themes, that we would deal with this, that we would begin to increase our institutional voice and we would increase our influence in the community and try to drive towards compassionate response when it comes to homelessness. And it's been a hard work. It's taken us into rooms we never thought we would be in, put us in conversation with people that never would have happened unless we had been intentional about it. And it's been a wild journey. And one thing that I've learned as we engage in this work around reducing stigma and reducing NIMBYism and helping people to understand why people end up homeless in the first place, people end up being compassionate when they understand people's stories. We start immediately talking about what are the reasons people end up homeless in the first place. What are the failures in the system? There had to be, 20 points of failure ahead of before when somebody walks through the doors of one of our shelters. And so the question becomes, what can we do to address all those systemic issues to prevent people from ending up homeless in the first place? And these are some of the questions that we ask here at the Gospel Mission, and we can do some things to address in our role here. But it's also a question that we need to be asking ourselves as a community, as a society, as a neighborhood, as a family unit, about what is our role to prevent people from becoming beggars on the side of the highway who need Good Samaritans in the first place. That's the question that all of us should ask. What's our role? One thing that's encouraging as we ask this question, it's another Martin Luther King Jr. quote that I think to often, especially when I'm discouraged. And he said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." I'm so encouraged by this. Because though the work of changing people's minds and choosing compassion rather than fear or hatred or stigma, that's a tough, grueling work. But I do believe that when given the chance, I do believe that our world, that our communities, our neighborhoods, our families, I do think that we bend towards justice, and it is a slow, arduous work. But I do believe at the end of the day that we have hope. Hope that we'll be living in a compassionate community, especially when it comes to big challenges like what makes people homeless in the first place.